In mid-1919, the war between China's northern cliques and the southern constitutional protection movement fizzled out with no peace agreement. But the end result was not the pre-war status quo. The tenuous alliance between the powerful Anhui and Zhili cliques in Beijing had devolved into a heated rivalry. And in the south, Sun Zhongshan had been pushed out of power and fled once more to Shanghai. But Sun still had supporters and wasn't out of the game yet. And in the northeast, a new power was growing. Hi, I'm Emma, and this is Communist Histories. In this video, I'm going to be discussing one of the most complex periods in the Warlord Era. So to help keep everything in order, I'm only going to be showing names on screen for the people that actually will be important moving forwards. Other people can be remembered just as representatives of the major conflicting forces in China at this time, the North versus the South, and unifiers versus decentralizers. As we saw in episode 6, Feng Guozhang, the president of China and leader of the Zhili clique, tried to ease Anhui-Zhili tensions by arranging for himself to step down as president, while Duan Qirui, leader of the Anhui clique, resigned as premier. The result of this was a president and premier, Xu Shichang and Chen Nengshun, both controlled by Duan Qirui. Feng died of illness shortly afterwards. With his death, control of the Zhili clique passed to the general Cao Kun, and Cao didn't intend to let Duan rule unopposed. The total collapse of Beijing's offensive against the constitutional protection movement in the south was a huge blow to the Anhui clique's prestige. It took another hit after the failure of Duan's diplomats to get any concessions out of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, and the ensuing May 4th movement, which I covered in episode 4. The end of the war hurt Duan in other ways too. From the moment China declared war on Germany, Duan had begun taking loans from Japan to build an army. Legally, this army was supposed to be training to eventually go to France to aid in the war. In fact, it was a private army loyal directly to the Anhui clique, and everybody knew it. Once the war ended, Duan no longer had any excuse to keep his private army around, and the Zhili clique began petitioning for its disbandment. Duan's solution? Start another war. War with the South was out of the question. They'd been fought to a standstill too recently. But the government had recently received a letter from some Mongolian nobles asking for Chinese assistance against a perceived threat of Bolshevik invasion. Watch the previous episode for a more in-depth look at the Mongolian side of this. Duan's lieutenant, Xu Shuzheng, marched into Mongolia, and it was totally occupied by November 1919. But in taking Mongolia, Duan made a new enemy. Jiang Zuolin, the leader of the northeast Fengtian clique, was one of Duan's allies and had recently unified his control of the northeast provinces. Jiang had been planning future expansion into Mongolia itself, and now there was a large Anhui army too close for comfort. Jiang sent out feelers to the Zhili clique, suggesting he was open to turning on Duan. Cao Kun got the message, and began building a nationwide coalition to overthrow Duan. He even negotiated a temporary alliance with the southern Guangxi and Yunnan cliques. Then he officially declared Duan a Japanese collaborator, and demanded President Xu Shichang fire Xu Shuzheng and recall the army in Mongolia. Xu Shichang complied, and the army marched back to Beijing, but not peacefully. Duan Qirui was done negotiating with the Zhili clique. He declared war. The war lasted only 6 days, and Duan was crushed. Zhili's slightly smaller army came out ahead due to some brilliant maneuvering by General Wu Peifu. This isn't a military history show, so it doesn't matter what that strategy was, but suffice to say that afterwards, Wu became known as the greatest strategist in China at the time, which skyrocketed him to second in command in the clique. Duan fled to the Japanese concession in Tianjin, and the Anhui clique completely collapsed. In Beijing, Cao Kun and Zhang Zuolin agreed to rule China in coalition, and sent diplomats south to negotiate reunification with the Guangxi and Yunnan cliques. The last we saw of southern China, the constitutional protection movement had just broken back into the Yunnan and Guangxi cliques, while its leader, Sun Zhongshan, fled back into exile into Shanghai. In Shanghai, Sun rebranded his party to the Chinese Kuomintang. This is the last time he changes the name, I promise. Sun still wasn't ready to give up, and he still had plenty of loyal supporters back in Guangdong. When the Zhili clique negotiators reached the south after the Anhui-Zhili War, the Guangxi leader was open to reunification. But Tang Jiyao of Yunnan treasured his independence, and he worried that if Guangxi went, it would only be a matter of time before Yunnan fell as well, and relations between the two cliques fell apart. Seeing this, Sun's most influential ally in the Guangdong saw an opportunity. Chen Zhongming was an ex-governor of Guangdong, and even outside his support for the Kuomintang, he opposed Guangxi's control of its province. Chen led a Guangdongese revolt against Guangxi, and with the help of Yunnan, pushed all the way into its capital, Guilin, and destroyed the clique. Chen then invited Sun Zhongshan back to Guangzhou, and the Second Constitutional Protection Movement was established. In May 1921, the remainder of the parliament of the First CPM elected Sun Extraordinary President. Immediately, this caused problems. The original Chinese constitution that the Constitutional Protection Movement was supposed to protect didn't have an extraordinary president. Tang Jiyao abruptly pulled Yunnan out of the movement, and tensions grew between Sun and Chen. Back up north, the coalition government between the Zhili and Fengtian cliques was a disaster from the beginning. Probably because the only thing they'd ever had in common was hating Duan Qirui. Cao Kun and Wu Peifu were determined that China's years of chaos were over, and the country could be united again. Zhang Zuolin was working to make his territory more independent. There was no possible middle ground. At the beginning of the war, President Xu Shicheng had abandoned Duan and allied with the Zhili. Because they controlled the president, Zhang felt that in the spirit of the coalition, Feng Qian was entitled to control the premier. So they forced the current premier to resign, and appointed their own guy, Liang Shiyi. The Zhili clique had not been consulted. Offended, just 1 month later they forced Liang to resign and installed their own man, Yan Huiqing. Zhang Zuolin wasn't the time to spend time negotiating. This meant war. This war lasted only about 2 months, ending in June 1922. Once again, Wu Peifu's great tactics won the day for the Zhili clique. But Zhang's army was only routed, not destroyed. He retreated back through the Shanhai Pass to his base in the northeast, marking Feng Qian's complete independence from the Beijing government and giving it time to rebuild. But the Zhili were content to write the northeast off for now, and focus on reforming the government of the rest of China. And they came up with a great propaganda move to do it. A fresh start. They forced their own puppet president to resign, and called for Sun Zhongshan to resign in the south. And then they called Li Yuanhong, the president who'd been forced out of office by Jiang Shun's Manchu Restoration in 1917, out of retirement to restore his presidency. Remembering the intrigue and chaos that had caused him to retire in the first place, Li himself was pretty tentative about this plan. He told Cao Kun that he would only agree if warlordism was abolished. Well, that was easy enough. Warlords were declared abolished. The warlords, who were officially still swearing fealty to Beijing, changed their titles from Military Governor to Military Affairs Reconstruction Commissioner. And that's it. But Li took Cao Kun at his word, and agreed to form a government. He appointed the Able Men Cabinet of prominent lawyers, diplomats, and educators to institute bureaucratic reforms. But while these men were definitely able ministers, they were pretty terrible politicians. They relied upon their legal authority to rule, thinking themselves above having to make alliances with any warlord cliques or parliamentary parties. Certainly this was a noble attempt at cutting down government corruption, but it alienated China's real ruling powers and left them defenseless. In late 1922, the Oxford-educated finance minister Luo Rengan negotiated a deal to reduce the government's debt by £200 million. But 2 months later, one of Luo's personal enemies in the parliament passed information to Li Yunhong indicating Luo's corruption. Not questioning the authenticity of this information, Li had Luo arrested for maladministration. The court threw out the charges as circumstantial, and the rest of the cabinet resigned in protest. Li was humiliated on the national stage, and Cao Kun was incensed. The only reason they'd brought back Li in the first place was to cover up the Zhili regime with a veneer of legitimacy, and he couldn't even do that right. So Cao orchestrated a wave of strikes in Beijing, demanding Li's resignation. Li worried that these strikes might get violent, so in June 1923, he fled the capital until things calmed down. But on the way to Tianjin, he was captured by Zhili agents. They forced him to resign as president and moved to Japan for medical treatment. Cao Kun was tired of relying upon puppets to rule for him, so he called for Parliament to elect a new president to replace Li and nominated himself. He then told all members of Parliament that he would give $5,000 to any man who voted for him. He won in a landslide. Cao hadn't even tried to keep the money secret, and he became known throughout the country as the bribing president. One of Cao's first moves as president was to enact a new constitution, which was actually the most progressive and democratic yet. Shame that it was totally ignored. By this time, the various warlord armies were the only real power in the country. In 1916, there had been 500,000 professional soldiers in China. By 1923, there were 1.5 million. And it was becoming clear to the opponents of warlordism that only another army could defeat them. Sun Zhongshan's government in the south was still shaky after the withdrawal of Yunnan, and criticism from Chen Zhengming due to his son's election as extraordinary president. And that was only the beginning of the rift that grew between Sun and Chen. Chen was a strong decentralizer. He opposed warlordism because the kind of autonomy it created was chaotic and violent, and he had joined the Kuomintang and invited Sun back to Guangzhou because he feared that an end to warlordism on Beijing's terms would mean losing Guangdong's autonomy to the northerners. Chen did want Chinese reunification, but he wanted it reunited as a federalized system, and he hoped to achieve it by making Guangdong into a model province, so inspiring that the rest of China would just choose to join up with it. Sun Zhongshan did not consider this practical or desirable. He wanted a centralized and strong China that could finally stand up to the foreign powers, and he realized that this could only be achieved through force. Sun saw Chen's conquest of Guangxi as only the first step in what would be a grand northern expedition to throw out the warlords. So in 1922, when the Zhili clique beat the Fengtian and offered a fresh start with Li Yunhong, Chen Zhengming was optimistic, but Sun Zhongshan saw it as just a mask for Cao Kun. Sun refused to resign as president, so the Zhili secretly told Chen that they would make him governor of Guangdong if only he would deal with the Sun problem. Shortly afterwards, Chen's forces began shelling Sun's office and residence. Once again, Sun had formed an alliance in which the other partner controlled the entire military apparatus. So unable to fight back, he fled, again, to Shanghai. This was Sun's last flight into exile, and coming up we'll be seeing the steps he took to prevent another one. But for the next episode, I'm going to be returning to see what the Chinese Communist Party had been up to while all this was going on. Like and subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.